Hi, this is Ross Payton, and this is episode 0 of Ludonarrative Dissidents. This is a new limited series podcast I'm doing with Greg Stolze, creator of Unknown Armies and A Dirty World, and James Wallace, creator of The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Each episode we will look at a game and analyze it. We're running a Kickstarter now to fund the rest of the season, so if you like this episode, please back it. I'll have more details after the episode. Enjoy! Hi, welcome to episode 0 of Ludonarrative Dissidents, a new podcast about RPGs, role-playing games, where we're going to dissect a particular game and figure out what it does, how it does it well, and why people play it. I am Ross Payton, the host of Role Playing Public Radio. I've also created Base Raiders. I've written for Clips Phase and a lot of other games over the years, and but yeah, I am not alone in this podcast. My two co-hosts. First off is Greg Stolze.
Hi. You've probably heard me on other podcasts, either shilling my wares or just doing actual plays of Termination Shock and $1 Million Soulmate. Mm-hmm. I'm also known for designing the ore system that powers godlike and wild talents and rain. I did some work for Delta Green and co-created Unknown Armies.
Mm-hmm. And my other podcast host here is James Wallace.
Hello, I'm James Wallace. I'm on the other side of the Atlantic, responsible for strange time differences and occasional lag. I've been kicking around the industry since the 80s. I'm best known for running Hogshead Publishing in the 90s. We published Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. We published Nobilis 2nd edition, The Great White Book, and a bunch of others, including the New Style line, which basically kickstarted the story game revolution of the late 90s. I designed the first of those, The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen. I also co-created the storytelling game Once Upon a Time, available from Atlas Games, now celebrating 4 years in print than I care to think about. Coming up on not far off 30 years in print, which is scary. Most recently, I did the 3rd edition of Baron Munchausen, which came out from Fantasy Flight a few years ago. I did the reboot of Paranoia, and I did a kickstarted solo game, solo heartbreaker called Las Vegas, for which I created the Fugue system, which also powers Steve D's Relics RPG, which is getting some really good press.
Mm-hmm. And the purpose of this podcast is to for the three of us to look at a particular game each episode and really let the three of us sort of like figure out what it does, what it does, and how it does it, and why, and what's good and what works for us and what doesn't. This is, as I mentioned, this is episode 0, so this episode will be freely available to everybody. But I think sometime in the future, we will be launching a Kickstarter to finance a season of this. The base, I think we're thinking about 6 episodes. And of course, whenever we launch the Kickstarter, we'll have more episodes. So yeah, well, let's keep an eye out for the Kickstarter if you're listening to this. And wherever you're downloading this, I'm sure we'll have more information as well. But yeah, this episode will be free regardless.
We promise to desperately promote it as soon as it's happening.
Yeah. So this episode we're going to be looking at Apocalypse World from Vincent Baker. And it is, of course, the one of the most influential RPGs of this century, I would argue. So at least the last 10, 15 years, because it led to the Powered by the Apocalypse movement of role-playing games, which have spawned dozens of games, has dominated Kickstarter for quite a bit, although that's recently changed the last couple of years as 5th Ed Compatible has sort of taken that mantle. But it also led to new iterations such as Blades in the Dark, the Forged in the Dark system, and sparked a lot of conversations about game design and what a role-playing game is and what it should do. And so we're going to be looking at the game that started all of this, Apocalypse World. So what does our first segment is what the game does. So Greg, what does Apocalypse World do?
Well, it emulates an ongoing series in a post-apocalyptic setting, something like Into the Borderlands or Mad Max, at a hard R level. This makes no pretense about not being horny and violent. It steers into those pretty hard. It focuses very intensely on the PCs. It's straight up front about the PCs are the most important characters. The story is happening to them because they are so cool and awesome and sexy. They are more worth paying attention to than anyone else in the setting. And this is not terribly uncommon. Feng Shui had this, was one of the first games to draw this really strong distinction between, okay, player characters aren't like everyone else. They're better. And that's why you focus on them. Apocalypse World is the same and focuses on that very mechanically as well. It is a player-facing system. I'll get into that a little more in the how it does what it does, but it has a laser-like focus on the PCs. And I would also say the other innovation of Apocalypse World was how it treated GMing. It does game mastering differently, and arguably, for a lot of people anyway, easier than the traditional approach of we're going to get a guy who's going to make a story with all these branching off paths, and then we will walk down it and try and find the one option that he didn't think up in advance and jump on that in both feet. Yeah. So, in general, I view let me digress here for a bit and hold forth.
Oh no.
I view gaming as a kind of conversation between the players who are chaos agents who don't know what's coming next, but who have agendas. The GM, who is an organizing agent who does have ideas about what could be coming next. And the dice, which are just pure chaos. Different systems change the balance of how much focus is given to any specific element. A lot of systems, especially in the trad space, are very GM focused. More indie games focus extremely random or are more player focused. I would argue that D&D, in many ways, is kind of replaces supplements the DM's authority with published materials, because you can do that with a dungeon. It's much more easy to keep a narrative constrained when it's literally happening inside a box. Which is why it's so easy to learn how to be a dungeon master compared to running Vampire the Masquerade, say.
Yeah. That's a good point. I do want to talk about in a little bit about you're talking about how the players are the coolest, most important people in the thing. And I was immediately thought of the OSR and that sort of mindset of GMing where you're trying to the GM is trying to simulate a given setting, and the PCs are no different than anyone else. But first, I kind of want to touch on James. What does Apocalypse World do in your view?
Well, my top point is exactly the same as Greg's. It's the coolest characters. You're the biggest badasses in that world at that time, or at least you're striving to be. Okay. I'm going to agree with Greg on the first point. It's about And I think it's a key point that it's about the biggest badass characters out there, giving players cool characters to be. And this is one of the things for me that's always sold a role-playing game. The two questions I always ask are, what's the world and who am I in it and what am I going to do? All right, that's 3 questions. And if the answers to those questions are not interesting, I'm not going to buy your game, much less play it. So it's interesting because I come from the British tradition of role-play, which is more influenced by the American school than by the European school, but is still distinct. We had a game in the early 80s called Dragon Warriors, created by Dave Morris and Oliver Johnson, which I actually republished in a single volume hardback in 2008, I think. But the original was published as paperback books. It's great. Dave was kind of my mentor. He was also my best man, one of several mentors. He was also the best-selling author in the UK in the early 90s because he wrote 6 Teenage Mutant Hero Turtle books. They were called the Hero Turtles over here because the BBC had a thing about the word ninja being a bad word and not allowing it. But he wrote 6 of these books, each of them selling more than 1 million copies in a year. He was on a fixed fee. But I digress. Anyway, Dragon Warriors is basically, it's D&D-esque. It's very much, it's all on D6, or primarily on D6. The books were sold in bookshops rather than in game shops to an audience who had never come across roleplay before. But it's not fighters and wizards and clerics. It's barbarians and knights, and it's the D&D character classes on steroids. In any scene, you are the most important people there. You are the heroes. You are the heroes of the story. So this is something that a lot of British designers and British players have kicked around with for some time. But I think Apocalypse World does it really well because these are not your standard. This is not, it's Mad Max and that one from that movie. These are distinct, original characters that feel different and feel unique and feel like they, in a real world, kind of define the world of Apocalypse World, which is kind of my second point, that it does, some design harks back to, I think, original D&D in that there's basically no background there. It's the main point of the background is on the cover of the book. It's the word apocalypse, which is what D&D did. It said Dungeons and Dragons, and that's pretty much all the background you get. All the rest of the background is defined by elements within the system itself. D&D is just fantasy. Apocalypse World is whatever apocalypse you want it to be. It does not dictate at any point. And so there's an element of collaborative world building in there. You work together to shape this world, to work out what its details are and how it functions. There's a key quote.
It does not define the world, but it implies the world. How about that?
Yes. Although what it implies are the characters and the effect that the characters are going to have on the world. There's very little, there's no monster lists and stuff. This is a pit that I think Dungeon World fell into, possibly the best known powered by the Apocalypse game. That has lists and lists of monsters. And the moment you start doing that, you're defining the world. Apocalypse World does very little. It talks about the psychic maelstrom that we'll come on to. But there's a key quote on page 80, which by coincidence I have up in front of me. The words, "Do not pre-plan a storyline, and I'm not fucking around." The quote. And it's the same. The GM is as much a participant in the creation of this narrative, the improvisational creation of the narrative, as the players are. Mm-hmm. They should not pre-plan either the storyline or really the background world to any great extent. We will come on to threat maps later. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, it's great. That was one of the things, there are many things that the original edition of Dungeons & Dragons did brilliantly well, almost by accident. And I think Vincent Baker recognized that. And I don't know if it was a conscious copy, but I do think it is one of the strengths of the game rather than a weakness, that it has no clearly defined background.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this seems obvious when you say it, but then think of what the average, well, I don't know if the average, but a very common mindset of Dungeons and Dragons players and DMs are, which is that there is a world, and my job as a DM is to to simulate this reality, this fictional, this world, and to be fair and consistent, and to give and to present a challenge to players. In other words, a lot of, especially this is very common in the OSR, the so-called old school Renaissance, is that it's basically like a tabletop version of an MMO, and is to like, this happens regardless of what your player characters do, and it is your job, it is your task to become special. To become special, you start as nobody, and you have to earn that specialness, because the rules that run your character are the same for everyone else. You're no different than anyone else, and you must fight to earn your place as a chosen one or a destined character,
which is a legitimate way to play. Mm-hmm. It's just not the only legitimate way to play.
Yeah, that's a good point, because and that's sort of the mindset that a lot of D&D players, I think, have, and OSR players, is that this is the only real way. It's sort of this bravado, or like, I'm cool because I managed to make a level. I managed to earn my wizard got to level 20 the hard way, and and so Vincent Baker was, I think, trying to like, no, this is a way you could just have fun and tell a cool story.
Well, what if we had fun and you didn't have to grind?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there is interesting fun to be had in the mindset of these games, but then it becomes sort of the adversarial mindset of like the DM, right. The players and DMs are each trying to outwit each other, and that's only fun if everybody's on that mindset. If some player's not on that mindset, it becomes very unfun, because it's like, I want my wizard to get revenge on the people who killed his parents, and like, no, I don't give a shit about that.
Good luck with that, Pally.
Yeah. And
it's the problems RPGs have always had. The idea that you start at low level. Well, there's no such thing as a low level Jedi. In Apocalypse World, everyone starts essentially as a Jedi. You've all got the cool powers. You've all got the unique things that only you can do. And that's fantastic. That is what people want from a role-play experience. I think it does as a game also, however, starting at that system, that level requires a level of prior knowledge of what a role-playing game is and how it works, and just being able to assimilate a rule system, a system of mechanics, and understand how to kind of optimize it and use it on the fly. This is not a game I would recommend for first timers.
I have heard some complaints that it's not, and yet at the same time, I feel like we can. This is my points for how it does it. It seems to me that a lot of games, especially games in the trad games, that is non-D&D stuff from the 90s, let us say, there was the assumption that the GM would do all this work and would have all this literary knowledge and ability. And if people like you and me, James and Ross, are probably people who read a lot and were really interested in stories and media and maybe got degrees in English literature. So to us, the idea...
I feel seen.
The idea of, of course you'll want to have some rising action and you'll need a denouement and this and that. It's second nature. But not everyone who wants to run a game is an English major. And I think Apocalypse World in many ways was, okay, what can we do for GMs who don't have a master's degree in arts and liberal studies? And what it does for them is provides support in the form of moves and fronts rather than just, the GM hand waves it. The GM decides what happens in the rest of the world. So it does that. And it also has player-facing rules. Only the players roll. Their roles are the parts that bring that chaos, that die-style chaos into it. And as a GM...
Here's a question. Sorry, where did that come from? Did that start with Apocalypse World? That idea that only the
it can't
players.
have.
I mean, we stole
No.
it. We stole it from somewhere for Paranoia. It seems
no,
to be
I think this-
fairly widespread now.
This sort of the conversation all came about from the Forge. Like Vincent Baker was there's a whole thing in the early 2000s with Ron Edwards, who wrote Sorcerer, and Vincent Baker and a lot of other people who were involved in this online forum called the Forge, where they're talking about role-playing game design, storytelling game design, and a lot of these ideas came out from these sort of games. So, and that sort of discussion, and those. The Forge is now closed, but you can read up on those discussions, and this is things like the gamist narrative simulationist theory of game design, and which is eventually supplanted, and all this other stuff. So, like, there was a conversation starting like around 2000, early 2000s, that really sort of eventually led into Apocalypse World, which I think first edition was 2009. So
at some point, someone said, having the GM roll dice and having the GM's dice interact with the player's dice is not actually more random than just having the players roll dice. Mm-hmm. It's just adding an extra layer of finicky handling time to games that already are at risk of the problem of packing a half hour of fun into a 2-hour combat.
And that's a really good segue into our second segment, officially.
Officially.
Yeah.
I thought we were there, man.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of do.
I'm
I mean,
lost.
yeah. So
okay, so let's get back into the actual discussion. Something I've been doing in my own design that I think has arisen from seeing people respond to Apocalypse World and Powered by the Apocalypse is I'm like, okay, people really are hungry and thirsty for GM support beyond just giving them more stuff and more options. They want things that tell them this is how you structure it. And so you can see a little of that in the third edition of Unknown Armies, where, I break things up. I'm like, okay, when you are planning things and thinking things up for your game, you want to be antagonistic and you want to think, what is the worst choice I can force these players? What is the hardest pressure I can put on them? What is the point on their character sheet that hurts, and how can I press on that hard? And then once you're gathered around the table, I want you to switch to being the character's biggest fans and, let's see how awesome they can be and how cool they can make this story. Because on one hand, the GM does kind of have to play against the players. On the other hand, the GM has to help the players. And it's a very weird situation to be in. Apocalypse World has dealt with that problem by constraining the GM, but at the same time giving them the structure to work with. It's, when the players do this, then you get to take a move as hard as you want to. But because you cannot take your moves until the players have triggered them, it keeps you from just being a killer GM who throws insurmountable challenges at them until they are crushed and you're left alone in the basement on Sunday night wondering why no one showed up for your game.
So to explain that in the most common sort of Powered by the Apocalypse game mechanics, the easiest example I can now, I have not run or played Apocalypse World itself, but I have run and played in many Powered by the Apocalypse games, and the idea is the GM never rolls the dice. The players only roll the dice. And so, for example, when the players face a threat, let's say a bad guy that they want to kill, so it's combat. In Apocalypse World and other Powered by the Apocalypse games, the GM does not roll to attack. The monster does not roll to attack. The bad guy does not roll to attack because the GM doesn't roll dice. So as a GM, I cannot hurt the players with this bad guy who's pointing a gun at them until the player rolls the dice to do something about it. Like, are they fighting back? Are they trying to escape? Well, roll the dice to see if your character misses with the attack, misses, but if you attack the bad guy, then the bad guy gets to automatically inflict damage on you. They just do. Now, if you roll really well, it'll be less damage, or maybe if you have a special move, you can avoid that damage entirely. But the default is when you attack a bad guy, the bad guy inflicts damage back on you automatically. So that's the mindset, as opposed to like D&D or a lot of other games where the GM rolls to attack, the player rolls to attack, and you can have things where both of you hit, or one of you hits, or both of you miss, and then you're just rolling dice until someone rolls above an 8.
Which, let's be honest, is fun. Rolling dice. I'm playing D&D with my kids and some of their kids over Zoom at the moment, and it's fun. They really get into those long, to me, quite tedious combats. And that's full of adrenaline, and someone was down to 1 hit point last week and burst into tears. It's quite something. It still works.
James, are you saying that you made a child cry with gaming?
And I'm proud of it. I think, I will put that on a T-shirt. I made my child cry with gaming. She's a bad loser. She's a table kicker. I'm perfectly honest. She's the number of games that have ended up spread over the kitchen floor because she was losing and did not want to lose. She did not want to get to the point where the game was over and she had lost. She would rather cause us all to have to pick up all the pieces from underneath the fridge for that to happen. We're working on it.
Yeah,
so, but no, they won.
Apocalypse World seems to assume that you are not a table kicker.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much, yeah. You are in control. You have the agency. The players and the player characters have the agency at all times. If they get damaged, it's their fault. There is the DM cannot just do bad things to them. There's always an element of player choice or player dice rolls.
The bad guy cannot hurt you unless you make a roll. Like the bad guy cannot do anything.
Cannot fudge rolls.
Because the players are
either way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
it's, I think, one of the things to explain the difference between Powered by the Apocalypse and like D&D per se is D&D emphasizes much more the game aspect. I think of like sports. Like sports fans assign narratives to sports all the time, but yet sports did not always fall that narrative. Like, oh, there's an underdog team and they've done so well, they defied the odds, and then like they just get crushed. Why? Well, it's a game and that can happen. Like, it has nothing to do. The narrative we assign to it has no bearing on what will actually happen in an individual game. But
why didn't the scrappy underdogs win? Well, it turns out that the other team could hit the ball farther and run faster, and that's ultimately what matters in baseball.
So, like, we like sports because of that chaos, because of that unpredictability. But on the other hand, you could not have that in like a movie or a novel, because if the heroes fighting the bad guy. Yeah. It's wrestling. Like, in wrestling, you have a narrative, and like there has to. And sometimes that's subverted. Many times it's subverted. But like you would not have a wrestling match where they're swinging chairs at each other and missing for 5 minutes. People would get bored. People like, what is going on? So like, do you want a game where you don't know what's going to happen because like it's all, or do you want something that's going to follow some kind of narrative structure like that? So I guess that's partially explaining the difference, but yeah.
But no, I agree. I think the move system is enormously good at creating dramatic narrative combats. It may not be a structured narrative in terms of the story. And when you're playing a role-playing game like Apocalypse World that is structured around a campaign, it's not a single session game. You can play it that way, but that's not how it's intended. The main thing is you want the continuing narrative. You want characters to continue, or narratives to continue from session to session, possibly in the typical open-ended way that only really RPGs and soap operas and comic books do. Mm-hmm. The move system is really good at creating that dramatic thing, because everyone has a small selection of superpowers. It's not unlike a superhero combat, in fact. you know what those moves are going to be in advance, but you don't know what order they're going to come out in, and you don't know necessarily how they're going to be countered or what effect they're going to have.
One thing also that the Powered by the Apocalypse system really emphasizes, at least in the games that I've read, Apocalypse World, Monster of the Week, Dungeon World, is to, and a couple others, that the GM should force the players to describe what their characters are actually doing, not to use the name of the move, not to, I read a sitch or I go aggro on the bad guy.
Those are the names of 2 Apocalypse World moves.
Yes, yeah, thank you. So, like, because players would just look at the tendency for most players is to look at them as like spells or powers that they do, and so like, well, I activate this spell, I activate this power, and no, like, well, how do you go aggro on this guy? Well, I'm just gonna aim my gun and shoot him between the eyes. Okay, well, let's roll to see how accurate you are.
That sounds aggro.
Yeah, and there's a continual emphasis on. The GM is supposed to emphasize, like, by only using the character names, not like, hey, Greg, what does Psycho Crusher do? It's Psycho Crusher. What are you doing? And so that it's, again, to emphasize the narrative that you
create a little more immersion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. The problem I have with this, I think it's a great system, but there are a lot of moves, and it's partly the role of the GM to identify when a player is doing something that matches one of their moves and go, are you doing this? Well, there's a lot of moves to remember. It's like trying to remember the effects of all the spells in the D&D player's handbook. The list of moves at the back of the rulebook is 4 pages long. And it's not in terribly big type. And some of them are fairly obvious, like dangerous and sexy, but they all have rules-based effects. And this is partially mitigated by the fact that everyone is supposed to have a printout of their not just the character sheet, but the playbook in front of them, so they have a reference. But the GM still has to remember all of these things, recognize when the situation is coming up in play. That does not fit. This is the reason I've never played Apocalypse World, because that's not how I GM. I'm very... Typically, I'll go, let's play game X, and then I'll just we collaboratively tell a story within that world with some characters. And occasionally I might look at the rulebook to pretend I'm remembering how it works. I'm a very loose DM. I have huge respect for the Apocalypse World combat system and move system generally. It's not the way I play games.
Well, and that's because you've got that English major thing where... crafting a narrative is natural to you. To a lot of people, it's not, which was news to me until I saw people talking about how, until this, I couldn't GM. People would just tell me they were trying something, and I'd freeze up and not know what was happening. But with this, you can
people
GM.
Want that hand-holding.
Well, it's not even hand-holding. It's a structure. It's, if X, then Y. Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whenever I run Powered by the Apocalypse or Blades in the Dark, or a Blades in the Dark version, pretty much everybody has those reference sheets handy as printouts. Because a lot of it's not just remembering the names of the moves, but like there's 3 mechanical effects: a miss, a partial, a success but with a complication, and then a full success. And depending on the move, there's multiple things. There's like a checklist of like, oh, you got a full success, choose one out of this list, or a partial success, you got this. Choose one, or if you get the full success, you get 2 out of this list. And there's like 6 things on that list. I don't think that's limiting though. Yeah.
It has tactically meaningful choices, which is something everybody wants. Everybody wants the mechanics undergirding their character to do something and not just be chrome.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not everybody wants that, but a lot of people like it that, okay, the fact that I'm casting this as a ray of fire does something different than casting it as a ray of frost. Even though if your system is vague enough, it can be like, oh, well, all these are just ray spells. They do this much damage. Describe that it's frost damage or fire damage or emotional damage, hurt feelings damage, looking like an idiot in front of the girl you have a crush on damage. So
there is one. So normally it works pretty well. The only thing that is a hang up is the read a situation. And there's a few of the moves that are like get information. And it boils down to get one or more of these questions answered. And they give you a list of questions, like who's the most dangerous foe? What's my most obvious escape route? But that's it. And so often, a lot of times, it comes up, the players want information that's not easily answerable by that question. Then that's kind of like the mechanics this is one of the rare times where Apocalypse World sort of mechanics kind of get in the way of our enjoyment. It's sort of like intruding on it because we I need to know if he's seen the book or not, if he's found the MacGuffin, because the MacGuffin, for whatever, there's some non-obvious question. And
right.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm trying to remember if it was I should have read through the whole thing more carefully, but I'm trying to remember if it was Apocalypse World or Dogs or even Kill Puppies for Satan, where it encouraged the GM when a player character is trying to tell if someone's lying, that the GM should just make it clear through their acting whether the person is honest or not. And if they're, it's like, oh, if they're telling the truth, just look the player in the eye and say it straightforward. And if the character is lying, kind of get shifty and don't look them in the eye and rub your lip a lot. And that, this was, I think the intent of that in whichever game it was it's not very interesting to get lied to and be suspicious and still be fooled anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a legitimate approach too.
It's like the secret doors rule in D&D, which allows you to check for a secret door. Be wise enough to recognize that there might be a secret door here. Check for a secret door, roll the dice, fail, completely miss the secret door. There's a bad rule.
This is the gumshoe insight from Robin Laws. Is there are no good mysteries about where the detective doesn't find the clue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about interpreting the clues, not finding them.
Yes.
So,
all right. So did we get through segment 2? Are we on to how people play it?
Yeah.
Wait. I think we've missed really two of the most important things, which both come out of kind of character creation and the way characters work.
All four.
Which is the links between the characters, the history stat, which is enormously important, that creates a bond between the player characters. And the fact that sex is actually something which is specifically referenced with its own particular rule on every single playbook. Which I think, possibly with the exception of Fatal, is unique in role-playing games up to this point, or up to the point that Apocalypse World came out anyway.
Well, I mean, obviously there have been numerous D&D supplements that are unofficial to varying degrees, but in terms of core games, there's not. Pendragon had romance mechanics, I believe, but that not quite the same thing. But this
goes
haven't
back
even talked about playbooks either. The playbook character creation system. But character relationships are really important in this. And that's common in a lot of these Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that during character generation, you create these links between characters, but they're just mechanical links. They're not actually narrative links. And I think that's a missed opportunity. But then I'm a narrativist. I'm all about the story. I'm much less about the rules and the game effects. And sex, likewise, you have sex with another character and it gives you, and actually them, an in-game bonus. Or in one case, in the case of the Maitre D playbook, if you hook someone else up for them to get sex with someone else, you then get a benefit for that, which is a beautiful, beautiful little rule. talking about the tone, the way that rules can set the tone of a background world, can set up the way this world works. That the inclusion of sex quite explicitly, and I use the word carefully there, I think is really, really interesting. I think it's a brilliant piece of design.
Yeah, and I was just, now glancing through the book and looking at, okay, so with this character, if you have sex with someone, that person immediately has a very strong relationship to you, and you get to choose if your relationship to them gets stronger or weaker by a step. And I'm like, and I feel like in play, there is some kind of emergent narrative pattern from that, but I can't figure out what that is just from on the page. But yeah, it's definitely very clever to have more and more. I'm a fan of, okay, yeah, let's start the players all off knowing each other and trusting each other and having a reason to go forward together. Whether that is just, as you're planning this, you can do it on the narrative side. As you're planning this, have a reason to trust one another, because otherwise the game will suck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you can do it. You can do it mechanically
for ensemble play.
Yeah. Or you can do it mechanically, like in Unknown Armies, where every character starts out with a very specific kind of relationship with the other characters. Mm-hmm. And what it reminds me of is Gregor Hutton's Best Friends. Which are you guys familiar with this?
I'm not.
I know Gregor. Yeah.
The thing I loved about it is that it's a game of high school girl cliques, and the way character generation happens is you go through each other character and say, I'm jealous of so-and-so because she's smarter than me, or because she's prettier than me, or because she's richer than me. And so your character, if all three players say, oh, I'm jealous of Greg's character because she's richer than me, then my rich score is +3. But if if it's varied, your stats vary. And so it innately wires in this set of envies and kind of conflicts, but also explains why people are together. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, Apocalypse World does that too. When it starts out, it's like, you are connected to this person this way and, to this degree. It doesn't say whether as I understand, if I remember HX correctly, it measures intensity, not positivity. So if you have HX3 with someone, you feel very, very strongly about them. That could be, I totally love this person, or it could be, I hate them so much that it keeps me awake at night. Either way, it's given you a powerful motivation to interact with them.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing in terms of how Apocalypse World does what it does is the playbook system for character creation, which I highly appreciate, because it's really good for one-shots. And because players can, it's this sort of checklist system where you basically, instead of for your stats and everything, you choose like which stat array you want. Choose a name, choose one set of stats, like whether you have which stat will be highest and which will be lowest. Then you have all the basic moves. Then you choose a couple of specific moves for your playbook. And then a couple of gear options, and then that's it. And then you worry about relationships and your look. But it's something that's very easy for new players to get into, and it's something that allows collaborative world building and character group creation to happen at a fast pace. So and it's easy to expand the game to create a new playbook. Like the second edition added a bunch of new playbooks, and there are numerous supplements out there for adding specific playbooks. And yeah, it's a very good bit of game design. But but we should
Apocalypse World produces new playbooks the way Dungeons and Dragons produces new monster manuals, spell lists, and dungeons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's very true.
Because when what you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and when all of the setting is implied through the playbooks, you're gonna put out a bunch more playbooks.
Mm-hmm. I guess now we're moving on to segment 3: how people play it.
Yes.
And so how there are a lot of specific mechanics or sort of advice for structuring a game that the MC, the Master of Ceremonies, which is what the GM is called in this book, does it. And there's a couple of different. One is collaborative world building, where the players are given, or everyone gives input on what the setting is and what's important about this setting. So, like as was mentioned earlier, there's no specific canon apocalypse. You make your own apocalypse and what that means. And there's advice for setting that. And obviously, the idea is everybody creates a unique setting when you sit down to play, which is highly so. Like, you don't really plan adventures. You just sit down and, like, here's what's going to happen. And
here's this extremely unstable world of want, need, brutality, and scarcity. There is no calmness anywhere. Jump in feet first. Let's see who bobs to the surface first is pretty much how it works. There is so much chaos going on all the time that it's not hard to string a story together, because it's just the way the way the game is structured. Things are already falling apart when you start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And very easy to throw new stuff into the background, either as a GM or as a player. You can just, because it's so largely undefined, if you want there to suddenly be giant mechanical spiders, there's giant mechanical spiders. And it's fine, and they will fit.
I think I may be the only one of the three of us who's actually run Apocalypse World. I ran it for 2 or 3 sessions, and I can't remember. This was years and years ago, and I can't remember why the game petered out. What I was planning, one of the things that Apocalypse World has is the psychic maelstrom, which has something to do with the apocalypse. But again, every group defines it differently, and I was planning on it eventually. I was planning on having it be, standard post-apocalypse, Mad Max, Into the Borderlands stuff, until at some point they would get far enough and they're like, oh yeah, the psychic maelstrom is Cthulhu. That was the apocalypse. If you get close enough to the coast.
Cthulhu? You? Surely not.
It was the early 2000s. Everyone was doing it, James. It was a different time.
It's just, I can imagine your players looking at each other going, this psychic maelstrom, what could it be? And looking at you and just kind of going, yeah. But yeah, I always feel the promise of the psychic maelstrom, which sounds like it's going to be enormously exciting when you read about it. It never quite, at least within the rule book, it's never quite fulfilled. It's something that's there, and it's something that, can, drive you mad if you expose yourself to it too much. And obviously it's not defined, because that's not the way that Apocalypse World works. But it never really becomes a fully fledged part of the game system for me, at least. It feels like probably the only part of the world that really needs a lot of almost GM pre-planning to create something that's going to be interesting, that's going to kind of cohere the narrative.
I would argue that Apocalypse World, it is not the point. It's not the book's jobs to fulfill that. They want that fulfilled at the table. The idea that the books will explain it and the books will tell you what's going on in the world, that's very 90s World of Darkness, right? That's very, let's have a meta plot and we'll have all
but what I'm saying is that in a game in which everything is kind of dictated by mechanics kicking onto other mechanics, the path to that discovery does not seem to be almost initiated. It's just kind of, it's the psychic maelstrom just feels like it's there. It doesn't feel like it has a purpose beyond just kind of being there.
Well, because I think the psychic maelstrom is something that is not commonly, it's not a common trope in post-apocalyptic, in the genre. Like, this is very much focused on a certain genre of post-apocalyptic settings, and like in Mad Max and The Walking Dead and any number of post-apocalyptica, there's not really like psychic stuff. Now there are some settings that have that, but it's certainly not a universal feature like bandits are, or like weird little fiefdoms and like characters who are nomads and more things of that nature. It's kind of feels like, and it's a supernatural thing. Well, that's the whole thing, is it's something that is not replicatable in reality. Whereas, action movie style fighting, stuff like that, is kind of like, if you look at it, well, they're just really good at fighting, even though they're doing stunts that should get them killed, any normal things. Like, it's just it's the difference between something that is, overtly impossible versus something that is exaggerated. And I think that's part of sort of the difference there. Is like, what drives this psychic maelstrom? Like, is magic real, or is this magic, or is this some weird sci-fi thing?
And this is where your English major types can set up camp and be like, okay, this I will make mine.
Mm-hmm. There is, in second edition, there are some differences. Like, there's Psi-Harm, like on page 217 of second edition, talking about like what happens when your character is exposed to the world psychic maelstrom, and then the player character will have to roll to see what happens on what the character does, whether they just lose their footing or they lose control, or it's so that's sort of like the thing that sort of stands out from the rest of this, because it's a thing that's sort of like not a common trope. So you have to do some more work about it. But of course we could focus on this all day, but we haven't even talked about really agendas yet.
Yes. So
yes,
agendas and fronts.
Well, fronts are for our listeners. Fronts are used in first edition, but in second edition, they became threats, threat maps. So, all
right, I've got first edition. Mm-hmm.
So
I've got second.
But I think it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's just different language.
A refinement of the idea, which is that instead of statting up a guy who has abilities that parallel a character's abilities, but are a little bit better because you're planning to have 3 characters have to fight this guy, instead you have an amorphous situation or a problem that is, unless dealt with, going to grow, expand, and change the setting in a way that the players will not like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, and in second edition, a threat map is there's 8 directions, and you have a little map, sort of a to where you place the threats in relation to each other and to the player characters. The player characters are like at the center, and you figure out what direction they're coming from, and are they working on each other? So it's a relationship between the player characters and the resources versus all of the threats and what the threats are doing to each other, and in a very broad sense.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's genuinely a fantastic way of mapping all of this stuff, because when most people think of a narrative, they think of it in simply a linear fashion. They think of it as a straight line, and this creates it much more. It gives it another dimension. It's worth saying that, you say it's divided in, north, south, east, west, but the other directions are in, up, out, and down. So those can mean pretty much whatever you want. And, they don't have to be spatial dimensions at all. the emotional dimensions or whatever. The threats do not have to be physical threats. They don't have to be a whole bunch of people in beaten up, Mad Max jerry-rigged cars. It's a lovely, lovely way of mapping the future of a campaign or the future of a series of game sessions without having to sit down and go, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens.
Right.
It's really nice. It does draw up one of the problems I have with Apocalypse World, which is that the book organizationally is a bit of a nightmare. The phrase threat maps is used, I checked this, it's used 8 times before it is actually explained in any sense. And then in none of those 8 references does it say, we'll explain this later, or see page so-and-so. You're just expected to go, oh, threat maps, right, that's going to be a thing. Oh, it's still going to be a thing. Okay, this is actually a joke I did in Baron Munchausen, introduced the name of a game mechanic and repeatedly did not explain it, with the Baron saying, no, we'll get to it. Vince does it for real here.
It's easy to do. Writing a game can feel a little bit, when you've got the mechanics all sorted out in your mind, but have to write them down in an order. It can feel like trying to assemble a bicycle while you're riding it.
Yeah.
But
that's a good way
but you still got to do it. You still have to explain things the first time you use them, or at the very least, say this will, this will impact a threat map. See page XX. It's not hard to type see page XX.
Yeah,
that's why the XXs are in there. It's because people don't go back later on and put the actual page numbers in, but they remembered that they should.
Yeah, I really haven't seen a Powered by the Apocalypse game that does it super well. I mean, Blades in the Dark does organization very well, but it's an iteration of Powered by the. It's not technically Powered by the Apocalypse. So, but yeah, if you want to look at good organization, look at Blades in the Dark. Like not yet. I'm also looking the index. There's one thing, to look it up. The World Psychic Maelstrom which is how it refers to it. The World Psychic Maelstrom, not just Psychic Maelstrom, is not listed in the table of contents. It is in the index with multiple page numbers, but not one this is what it is. It's just every time it's referred to, it's just it's mentioned on page 8, not very just briefly, but the organization. I would definitely agree.
Sure. It's by far the worst offender. I would put it 2 or 3 levels above my current Bet Noir, which is the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition Player's Handbook, which is a fucking mess. The game system is great. The organization is deplorable, and the index is printed in tiny, tiny type. And I am 54, and my eyes are not great. It's a niggle. I'm just bitching.
Who organizes games really well?
Well, Blades in the Dark, as I said. Okay, it's the first thing that comes to mind.
We've got your vote, James.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think the last time I read a rule book and thought this is really, other than the ones I've done myself, of course, obviously.
Right. Excluding our own work. That's the hard part.
I thought Cubicle 7 made a really nice job of the latest edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. But I tend to be biased towards that game generally because I'm an NPC in it.
Yeah. I generally don't read a lot of other people's games to my shame. But if we wind up doing this podcast, I will then have all the reason in the world to buy more games and stick them on my shelf.
Back the Kickstarter. Force Greg to read role-playing games again.
Another example, because I have to review RPGs for radio, I try to keep up on them. Lancer does a really good job. It's a very complex game.
I've heard Mothership is real. I don't know if it's the organization. I've heard Mothership has really, really good layout, and
it has really good layout. It gets a lot. It's a very dense. It's done it as a zine, like a 40-page zine, and the layout is very good. Character creation, actually, your character sheet has all the core rules for the game, so you only have to look at your character sheet and play. I do have some complaints with Mothership as a game. The organization design is very good, but. moving back, are you ready to talk about why people play it that way?
Why people play Apocalypse World the way they play Apocalypse World. I've got 3 points for why people play it that way. One is that when you are a GM, the Apocalypse World approach, if you are not a really experienced GM and you are not a super confident improviser, and you do not know how to build the intricate structure of an ongoing story-based tabletop role-playing game campaign, this helps you. It's like, okay, here is a setting where things are just going to happen because there's no stability. What you just need to do is deal with things that happen as they happen, and they will tell you how to deal with them. So the GMing nightmare, as far as I'm concerned, is that brain freeze moment when your players come up with some jack move that you did not see coming, and the rules say it worked. I'll just seduce the dragon. And you're like, you'll just what the what? I rolled a natural 20 with my charisma bonus. That means the dragon is obsessed with me. I have to go to the bathroom now. And you scuttle off to the bathroom and splash cold water on your face, saying, "Think, what does a horny dragon do? What is a horny dragon like?"
Yeah.
See, earlier on we were talking about table kicking as a bad thing. Sometimes you just need to throw it across the room and go, we're done. More than that, it allows, it's one of the few games where the GM can be completely surprised by where the story goes. Instead of having to sit down and either read a module or prepare a module, or at least, as I'm sure most of us do, write down a list of names and some vague notes about maybe silver is cursed, ?
Likes pie?
You know, or indeed that moment where you just let your subconscious make it up. Because of the way it's structured, the GM still has to do the work, but the players are doing a lot of the narrative development work as well and bringing new elements into it. Which means it's low prep, which means you don't have to do a huge amount of work before a session. And the number of people I meet, and I say, I'm a games designer, I do a lot of role-play stuff. I talk to a lot of people. I say I work in role-playing games. They go, I used to play a lot of that when I was at college or when I was in my 20s. And then it just kind of got away from me. It's no, you've got a life and you've probably got a partner and maybe you've got kids and you've got a demanding job. We don't have the time. Our free time becomes increasingly scarce as we get older. Until the fabled days of those retirement communities, which are just going to be shelves and shelves of games along the walls. I have friends who are actually planning where they're going to retire all together to just play games. Of course, the apocalypse is coming before that happens. But having a game that the pick up and play role-playing game is something that people have been trying to create for decades and decades. There was Sandman Map of Halal from Pacesetter in the 80s, if you remember that. That was genuinely... It's extraordinary. And Pacesetter was a bunch of ex-TSR employees who did Time Masters, Chill, they're best known for, Star Ace, I think it was, and Sandman Map of Halal. And it was a 3-session RPG with, theoretically at least, 0 prep. And the idea was that you woke up, the player characters, and there were 3 of them, woke up in the middle of a situation with amnesia. So there was no character generation. And there was supposedly a $10,000 prize if you worked out who these player characters actually were. And it was going to be a set of 10 games, and they only ever published 1.
What? Okay. Well, that sounds like Psychosis Ship of Fools. Another, you're amnesiacs in... you wake up on a spaceship in cryo storage, and you're, everything's gone wrong. You don't remember who you were. Probably a side effect from having yourself froze. And I've been, as I have aged and have, even as a professional, felt less time to spend hours prepping games. I've tried to write stuff that is low prep or prep free. $1 Million Soulmate, no prep. The forthcoming Dueling Fops of Vindemir, no GM, no prep. It's just supposed to be a book that runs itself.
So my Las Vegas was supposed to be the same. Supposed to be zero prep. Didn't end up that way.
So it's a little bit of a grail. And Apocalypse World, I don't think is quite. You're still gonna have prep, but it's gonna be the pleasurable kind of prep where you're thinking about, okay, well, what's Big Hairy Steve thinking about now that Donna's run off with war crimes and is his woman now, and how's he going to be plotting revenge? And, it's going to be like when you are speculating about what's going to happen next on WandaVision, or when you are coming up with your headcanon, as opposed to, okay, well, I'm going to have to stat up 3 guards for the front of the fuel depot, and I'm going to have to, sketch out a map of which can also be very fun, but Apocalypse World having moved away from physics emulation to big drama moves it towards that enjoyment of film kind of feeling.
I agree, but there is one thing that I do find annoying about Apocalypse World and a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games. I tend to like to run a lot of different role-playing games, and I'm sort of unusual, I guess, in that respect, because people are. But I do. Certainly, this also is valid for convention play as well. Is that Apocalypse World is very, very focused on campaign play. And specifically says it's for campaign play, that you should run this multiple sessions in order to get the full game. And like one shots are really important, I think, for an RPG. Like I like one shots, and I think a game should not have less of an impact, or we should not experience a full game just because we haven't been able to put 4 game sessions into it over.
That's not very fair to sort of the form, though, Ross. Saying a game can't be a good game if it can't be run in a one shot. That's really putting a pretty big burden on a game.
Yeah, but okay, so maybe I should reword it to
that's
say
like saying all poems should be haiku. If I have to do more than
the
3 lines
to be haiku.
I think a game should be able to be run as a campaign or as a one shot without a lot of role playing games are.
Hard disagree.
Okay, all right.
Because I've written a game that can't be run as a campaign. So why shouldn't there be games that can't be run as a one shot? And the thing I've picked up from Apocalypse World, I think it actually says. I'm trying to remember if it says it. Again, it could be in dogs, but I do remember the statement because it was so striking was, oh, yeah, this doesn't really it can start off good, but it doesn't really get great till like session 3 or 4.
Right. And so I feel like there's very few games I can give that sort of commitment to, and it's very hard.
Yeah, we're getting older.
To justify that. Yeah, so.
I mean, that's fair and that's common, but maybe you're just promiscuous.
Yeah, but I mean, there are a lot of great role playing games that are really great as one shots. Some of the most memorable games are one shots. But that doesn't mean everything has to be a one shot. That's like I really like desserts, so I think that every food should be able to be eaten as a dessert. Right.
The other thing is, do we trust people when they say, "Oh, the game only gets good after 4 or 5 sessions"? I forget. Oh God, was it Final Fantasy 13 that I played? God, I put about 6 hours into it. I was reviewing it, and it was absolutely horrible. It is the horriblest of the Final Fantasies. And I was teaching at the time, and I was talking to my students about it. One of them said, no, you've got to keep going. It gets really good about 20 hours in. It's like, motherfucker, that's Stockholm Syndrome. if you've invested 20 hours in a game, you have to love it.
It's the sunk cost fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I could also make it clear that I did call my students motherfuckers on occasion. I'm out of academia now.
How'd that happen?
So
you just woke up one morning weeping because there were no more worlds to conquer in the ivory towers of academe.
No, it's because I went a story for another time.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah,
around about episode 187, I think.
I can actually feel the pain radiating at me across the ocean via Discord. So we'll just let that sleeping dog lie.
Yeah.
So, Apocalypse World is a game we could talk about all day, literally. We could do essentially a campaign of just analyzing, because there's a lot of other mechanics and systems and game design ideas in it. But to summarize, at least for me, like I understand why Powered by the Apocalypse became so large in gaming, because it did really show people, especially a new generation of tabletop gamers, that there was a different idea, a different mindset of running of playing role-playing games, other than the sort of mindset that D&D kind of teaches people by default, which is you're in a box, where you're trying to simulate a rule set, like an MMO in a sense, and instead you are the main character. The spotlight's on you. The game is whatever you are doing. And I really appreciate, and also, player facing mechanics are very important for a lot of reasons. My friend Caleb Stokes created a whole role-playing game, Bread Markets, with that idea, and as one example. So I quite appreciated. There's jokes about Powered by the Apocalypse being sort of like over and done with, but now I'm not so sure. I think iterations like Blades in the Dark show that there's still a lot of cool ideas and interesting games to come out of this design theory. So, Greg, how would you summarize
my takeaways about Apocalypse World is that it had a very important insight about the way that GMing could be done, and that it took a lot of unexamined assumptions about gaming, about GMing specifically, uprooted them, turned them on their heads, and said it could also work this way. And clearly this works for a lot of people. Something we didn't really get into is I feel that the Powered by the Apocalypse thing also was very empowering to creators. The joke about the Velvet Underground was that they never sold very many records, but that everyone who bought a Velvet Underground record, went on to start their own band. And it seems that in addition to Apocalypse World being successful by its own metrics, it's also been successful in teaching a lot of people, you could design your own game. It's not actually that hard. It's not as hard as some people make it look.
Yeah,
so I think it's been empowering to creators as well as players as well as GMs.
Think of how like games like Alas, the Awful Sea came about, which is about being like, a whaler in 19th century, in a 19th century setting. And that's it. It's just the drama of Moby Dick, essentially, and the people that are in your life. And like, that's just one of the many Powered by the Apocalypse games. It's great. Sorry, James.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you're exactly right. It gives a very easy template for creating new games. It almost says, here are the spaces you fill in. Much like a playbook, really. Here are the spaces you fill in to turn this into a different game. And to the degree that it's almost become the default in indie game design, you now just assume that an indie game is going to be, if not explicitly powered by the apocalypse, at least heavily influenced by it, in the way that everything in the previous 30 years would have been heavily influenced by D&D, or in some cases, basic roleplay. It's now powered by the apocalypse. And I think that, 2 out of the 3 of us haven't actually played it. I think Greg's exactly right. It will be remembered for its influence, not for what it actually was as a game, and what some of the people are doing with it, what some of the other designers doing with it. It's just extraordinary. I think for me, Avery Alder, everything she touches turns to gold. Monster Hearts is Apocalypse World as a game, qua game, is great, but Monster Hearts is a work of sheer genius.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. So it's because I am an English literature graduate, and what I look for is games that can create stories that touch us, that make us feel something. Apocalypse World, I think there's a distance between the players and the characters that makes that difficult, but Monster Hearts closes that gap in a really exquisite way. But people should read both of them. If you're serious about games design, these are both games that you should absolutely know and understand.
Yeah.
All right, I'll check out Monster Hearts. Fine.
So thanks for listening to our episode 0 of Ludonarrative Dissidents. I am at Ross Payton on Twitter. You can check out my podcasts, Role Playing Public Radio, the RPPR Actual Play, where we do a weekly actual play podcast of different role-playing games. We're actually doing, as of we're recording, doing a Blades in the Dark campaign. We've done many Powered by the Apocalypse games over the years. But
have you guys ever done $1 Million Soulmate?
Not yet, but not yet. So we also, I also have Night Clerk Radio, a haunted music review podcast, Vaporwave and Dark Ambient, other weird genres of music, and The Mix 6, a beer review variety show. Sorry, it's like I do podcasting full time. So just follow me on Twitter to keep up on all those. Greg, how can people find you on the internet?
Well, there's gregstolze.com, which it's probably its most prominent feature is its downloads and fiction library section. I have been for years doing this scheme where I ask people to pay me money so that I can put short stories and gaming materials up for free on my website. And there is a lot of fiction up there. You can also find me on Twitter at Greg Stolze. I was blessed with a SEO name.
Yeah.
James?
I am at James Wallace on Twitter. That's Wallace with an IS like Wallace Simpson, not Wallace with an ACE like Wallace and Gromit. Also, jameswallace.com is rather out of date, but does have my resume on it. If you want to buy my stuff, I have a couple of things on Drive-Thru RPG, notably the 3rd edition of The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen and Alas Vegas. The book I co-wrote with Ian Livingston, The History of Games, Board Games in 100 Moves, is available from Dorling Kindersley in all good bookshops, online and otherwise. And Games Workshop has just republished Hammers of Ulrich, which I co-wrote with Dan Abnett and Nick Vincent. It's a Warhammer novel, now a handsome hardback, and still don't get any money off it because that's not the way Games Workshop works. But it's a handsome book, and I'm quite pleased with my bits.
Sent you a copy for your show.
They sent 2 copies, completely out of the blue.
What? Okay.
Yeah, no, they're good like that.
That's just as good as getting paid.
Twice a year, I get a royalty statement. For the last 20 years, I've been getting these royalty statements, and every time they go, no money for you.
Oh, well, if you want to send us some money, then we'll keep an eye out for our Kickstarter. But yeah, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you all later.
Yep. Thank you.
So that was episode 0. Our plan is to make at least 6 episodes, each focused on a game that backers of the Kickstarter vote on. We narrowed the list of games to 15, which you can see on our Kickstarter page. We also have other rewards like a PDF bundle of our games, a chance to play in a game run by us, and a lot more. We have some stretch goals to make more episodes, and this Kickstarter will only run for 2 weeks, so please back it if you want to hear more. Thanks!